Hey, I'm firearms attorney Gilbert Ambler, and I'm back today because finally, after more than a year of waiting, probably more than a year and a half of waiting, on August 17th, 2026, so this week, the Department of Justice finally dropped their final rule explaining how they're going to process 925C federal gun rights restoration applications. The final rule that they dropped this week was 144 pages in length. That was not the rule itself. It was commentary, department response, and then the rule. I've read and we're going to discuss the synopsis of what they talk about in these 144 pages. And of course, the rule itself is most important, but I read all the commentary because the commentary helps inform how the Department of Justice is actually going to implement this process. What I don't want to do in this video is go deep into the weeds on what the process is or who it's going to help. I've done other videos on that subject. We'll link to them in the comments below. If you're interested in the process and what the process entails and how to go about the application, watch those other videos. What we're going to focus on in this video is the differences between the proposed rule, which came out in the summer of 2025, and the final rule that came out this week, August 17th, 2026, because there's some nuances. I'm going to read through a list of those nuances and the difference between the proposed rule and the final rule and how they change things and how they help things. And I guess before I do that, I will briefly go over what is this all about. What we're talking about here is federal gun rights restoration. So the federal government has a statute that says, if you fit any of these categories in 18 U.S.C. 922G, you are federally prohibited from possessing firearms. Now, in many circumstances, you might be both federally prohibited and prohibited at the state level. For example, if you have a felony in most states, a felony conviction, in most states, the federal government would say you're prohibited and the state would separately say you're prohibited. Now, in many states, there is a process by which you can apply for a state-based restoration, state-based pardon, state-based expungement, or a state-based setting aside of the conviction. And if the federal government recognizes that process, and the federal government explains that process in their definitions at 18 U.S.C. 921, they say we don't count as a conviction a felony that has been expunged or pardoned, so on and so forth. So if you have a state-based conviction and you can go through that state-based restoration process, that would automatically trigger federal restoration. But there's several folks out there that don't have good access to a state-based restoration. And I'll give you the top three categories, in my opinion. Number one would be, again, felons, and that would be two categories of felons, either those that were convicted of a federal felony from which a state doesn't have jurisdiction to restore gun rights, or somebody who has a state-based felony conviction, but the state doesn't have a good process to restore gun rights. And so this would be, for example, those of you that live in Pennsylvania that has it's not impossible to restore rights from a felony, but it's not super workable. The federal restoration process would provide a process to restore rights federally, and once your rights are restored federally, speaking specifically to Pennsylvania, for example, you could apply for state-based restoration. And so this would be, again, an avenue for felons, number one. Second category of folks that are going to see a lot of benefit from this would be those convicted of a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence. Why is that? Well, a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence causes a permanent prohibition on your right to keep and bear arms in the eyes of the federal government, and many states don't have a process to restore rights from a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence. The third category of folks that I think will be really helped are probably folks with dishonorable discharges. Now, there's other categories of folks that are prohibited under 18 U.S.C. 922G, a lot of which are either not going to be hugely helped because this rule will presume that they won't help them. For example, if you're a fugitive from justice, this rule presumptively would not help you. Instead, they'd say, go turn yourself in and deal with why ever you're a fugitive from justice. Additionally, another category we talked about previously that's changed a little bit would be those that have suffered a mental health commitment. We'll explain today why this federal restoration process is less likely to help somebody who has a mental health commitment, unfortunately, and we'll talk about that today. Other just sort of big picture notes from the 144 pages before we dive into those specific differences. Number one, I think it's important to recognize that part of the reason the Department of Justice is reigniting this process, this federal gun rights restoration process, is because they recognize that it is probably unconstitutional to permanently prohibit somebody from possessing arms in many cases when you're talking about a decades-old felony conviction or an older misdemeanor crime of domestic violence or something like that. So it is in recognition that that is probably unconstitutional for many folks that they are reigniting this process. This is a statutory process, 18 U.S.C. United States Code 925C. It's been on the books for decades. It has been defunded since 1992. And again, this is all refresher material, but back in 2025, the Department of Justice issued a proposed rule that they were going to restart this process. This is now the final rule that has been announced, and we'll talk about the timelines associated with when we're actually going to see everything start to take effect here. But it's coming up soon, and that's exciting. As always, before we dive into these specifics, if you have not yet hit that subscribe button, what are you waiting for? Hit subscribe, like, comment with your thoughts, and share with your friends. That way you and your friends can keep getting this important Second Amendment related content. Now, I did sort of just a brief refresher of the process and how we got here and why we're moving forward to this process. I think it's also worth a brief refresher on what types of things would you need to apply. You're going to need fingerprints. You're going to need a statement of why you're prohibited. You're going to have to describe each and every reason that prohibits you. You're going to have all sorts of court documentation. So documentation from an indictment, from an information, from a plea deal, from any finding of guilt, from anything underlying the plea deal, such as a statement of facts that was read into the record. You're also going to need documents from probation or parole. You'll need documents to show when you were released from incarceration. You'll need affidavits. You'll have to write your own affidavit. You'll have to have 3 supporters write affidavits on your behalf. And this is just a sort of short synopsis of all the things that you're going to have to put together to have a complete application here. But what I really want to discuss in this video, as I said, I'll link in the comments to my old videos that describe all this. What I really want to do is read down for you the list of things that I marked down as notable changes from the proposed rule in 2025 to where we are today in 2026. First thing is certified records are no longer necessarily required. So under the proposed rule, every court record had to be a certified record, which is a pain and can be expensive and costly to get from a court. Now they are saying if certified records are difficult to obtain, you can submit a true record as long as that record came from the court. So you still have to go through the courts to get the records, but true records can now be used as a substitute for a certified record where the clerk has actually stamped the record. Second thing, if records cannot be located due in no part to the failure of the applicant, meaning it wasn't like you didn't try to get the records, but you cannot get the records. The court destroyed them already, or the courthouse burned in a fire, or there was a flood, or there was some reason why you cannot obtain the records. You can now explain the efforts that you took to locate the record and then write a declaration on why it's no longer available. And that will be a substitute to actually being able to obtain those records. So if you can't get records from your conviction, you could still move forwards. The application fee has also changed. The application fee that they had addressed or suggested initially was $20. They bumped that up to $30, and they plan to review that periodically, and it might change again in the future. Another very interesting one. You need to submit an affidavit explaining that you are no longer taking part in any activity that would prohibit you from possessing firearms, which means you have to include in that a statement that you are not an unlawful user or addicted to a controlled substance. Historically, marijuana has been a controlled substance that prohibits you from possessing firearms. But this year, the United States Supreme Court handed down a decision called the Hamani decision that, as applied in that case, found that it was unconstitutional to restrict someone from firearms access who was a regular marijuana user. Based on that, in the final rule, when you write out and swear that you are not an unlawful user or addicted to a controlled substance, they are excluding marijuana from that definition. So for purposes of this application, you could be a marijuana user and still truthfully say on this application that you are not an unlawful user or addicted to a controlled substance. And that's very interesting because it may highlight a future change to the 4473. Because keep in mind, if you got restoration under this 925C process, you would eventually have to go, if you wanted to purchase a gun at a gun store, fill out a 4473 with the same declaration that you're not an unlawful user or addicted to a controlled substance. And as of today, at least, that question would include marijuana. So maybe a change coming on that. Another interesting thing that has changed Chief law enforcement officer notification is no longer required from you, the applicant. So in the proposed rule, you had to tell the chief law enforcement officer in your jurisdiction that you were applying for this. You no longer have to tell the chief law enforcement officer. Now, when you submit the application to the Department of Justice, they're going to tell the chief law enforcement officer and give the chief law enforcement officer a chance to respond. So CLEO notification is still going to happen. It's just not required for you to make the notification. Instead, the DOJ is going to make the notification. Foreign criminal records are now going to be required if they would have been prohibitors. I'll give you a quick example. If you had been convicted of a felony level offense in England, because the conviction occurred in England, it does not prohibit you from possessing firearms under 922G. But let's say you also have a United States conviction that you're trying to restore rights from. The government says it is relevant that you are also convicted in another country, so provide us those records as well, and you have to provide them in English. Military records are now required even if your prohibition is unrelated to your service in the military. So obviously, if you are trying to restore rights from a dishonorable discharge, they're going to want to see your military records, but they now want to see your military records if you ever served, even if your prohibition is unrelated to your service. This is part of them trying to get a complete picture of the applicant. They want to understand who everyone is and their propensity for violence, etc. And so to do that, they want to know as much as they can about each applicant. Mental health applications will now be considered only if you can explain that you have taken every opportunity you can to restore and tried every avenue that is offered at the state-based level first. So essentially, you can apply for a mental health restoration if you have already tried every state-based avenue that exists and failed at those state-based avenues. So again, mental health restoration might occur for folks that live in a state that doesn't have an avenue available to restore gun rights. But if you are in a state that does have an avenue available, you need to try and fail before you would be considered for federal restoration. And if you try and fail at the state level, they say in this proposed rule, it's unlikely that they're going to overturn the state decision, but not conclusive. They've also moved some categories of folks that would have been permanently presumed ineligible for restoration. And again, it's a rebuttable presumption. So even if you are presumed permanently ineligible, and whole list of categories of folks that are presumed permanently ineligible, those whose conduct resulted in death. So if your felony conviction resulted in someone else's death, you're presumed permanently ineligible. Rape, arson, etc. A whole list of crimes that they say are violent crimes that we presume you to be permanently ineligible, although they will still look at applications and you could potentially convince them, if you go above and beyond with your application, that although you'd be presumed ineligible, your propensity for violence is different than others that are similarly situated and you still deserve restoration. But they have actually walked back a couple of categories that were presumed permanently ineligible, and now they're saying we're presuming are ineligible only for a 10-year period, meaning after 10 years from the date of conviction or the release of confinement or incarceration or probation or parole, we would now presume you to be eligible. Those categories that have been walked back are those convicted of gun offenses. Previously, if you were convicted under the proposed rule, if you were convicted of a felony level gun offense, you were presumed permanently ineligible. They now say that after 10 years, if it was a non-violent firearms offense, they would presume you regain eligibility. What type of offense? They discuss in here firearms possession on school property. If the firearms possession on school property was not related to a violent act, but was instead inadvertence, or you're not paying attention, or you failing to realize you had a firearm on school property and you caught a felony for that conduct, of course, that is not inherently violent conduct. After 10 years, you would be presumed eligible. Same thing for explosive related offenses. If you have a felony conviction related to an explosive related event that was non-violent, after 10 years, you would regain presumed eligibility. Final category would be those presumed ineligible due to felony-related animal abuse convictions. Now, after 10 years, if you haven't had any other convictions, everything's been going well, after 10 years, you would become presumptively eligible again. A couple of other, I think, important facts that I highlighted here. In the rule itself, they did not specify how applications have to be handed in. Now, we know that there is a web portal coming. We think that they're going to require the web portal be used, but they did not say that in the rule. So it is possible that you could still mail in applications or submit them some other way. They also dropped the expected number of applicants from 1 million expected applicants in the first year down to 330,000. Between us, I don't think they have any idea how many people are going to apply. The 330,000 number that they came up with is based on the past 3 years of denials. So the past 3 years of people that were prohibited from possessing firearms, tried to buy a gun and got denied. And there's lots of folks out there that are ineligible to possess firearms that know better than to try and buy. So I don't think that's necessarily an accurate number. Nonetheless, they dropped their expectation from 1 million down to 330,000. A final important point here, they said that if you apply and you are denied, you are going to be presumed ineligible for the next 5 years. So if you submit an application and you are rejected, you can reapply immediately, but it probably won't do any good because they will presume you ineligible for 5 years. Which brings me to a major point in the conclusion of this video, which is, do you need a lawyer to apply? And the answer is clearly no. I've talked to lots of people about this. You very clearly can put all of this together yourself. You do not need a lawyer. However, if you want to get this in during the Trump administration, while the fees are relatively low at $30, and you want to make sure that you do it right the first time so that you're not denied and not presumed ineligible for the next 5 years, you might consider having counsel. And if you're thinking about having a lawyer, my office is happy to consider representing you. You can reach us at 540-550-4236. Again, 540-550-4236. We do 15-minute consultations on this subject for $50. So you can call in. Again, you don't need a lawyer, but if you want to talk to a lawyer about this and consider applying in this first year, go ahead and give our office a call. And that brings me to the final point. What's the timeline on this? Well, from August 17th, they said that there will be 30 days after the rule is published that they will begin accepting applications for those that they invite to apply. And then after 75 days, they will accept their first batch of 5,000 applicants. Now, presumably those 5,000 applicants will come through the web portal. And at 75 days out, we're talking probably early to mid-November before they will start accepting in that first batch of 5,000 applicants. And after the first batch of 5,000, 120 days out, they will start accepting 500 more and 500 more and so on and so forth. Now, this timeline of how they're going to accept applicants was not in the rule itself, but was instead posted on the DOJ website, which means it is absolutely subject to change. My advice to anybody who wants a federal restoration is start early, make sure you have all your documents ready and ready to go. That way, as soon as that web portal opens up again, looks like we're anticipating now based on the final rule, mid-November, you would be able to submit right away and hopefully be included in that first batch of 5,000. If you enjoyed this content, go ahead and hit that subscribe button for us. Until next time.